Heavy rainfalls that slapped northern India over the last 72 hours, particularly Delhi NCR, Himachal and Uttarakhand. While the rainfall caused much disruption in the way of life, one event that stood out was the flooding of Gurugram or Gurgaon, the commercial hub of Delhi NCR. Not so much because it was any better, but in fact it became a meme fest with pictures that you can see on your screen. This is the destination of working class community of North India. Gurgaon, which represents the India story, its growth and glory, is inundated, and how. Joining us at this point in time to talk more about what it means for Gurgaon, its image. With me in the studio is my colleague Krishna Kumar, also joining us, Lloyd Matthias, who's an angel investor. I want to begin with you, Krishna. The meme fest, and I'm hoping that we can pull up some of those memes at least to show to our audience what Gurugram has become. You know, you can dive, you can swim, you have a falls in Gurugram and all of those interesting memes. But so to say, talking about the sorry state of affairs with one of the prime most commercial hubs in the country.
Right. I was just reading news, and I was trying to see the timeline. If you see, it was September last year, when Gurugram was flooded in the same southwest monsoon torrential rains. And now this is happening in July already, because this year, let's face it, rains have been more than usual in the first part of the monsoon. And the questions are the same questions that many of the urban centers in this country keep asking, like what happened in Bengaluru. Another place where some of the most well-paid working Indians are staying. They're paying tons of money as rent and in fact buying up property over there. And then you see those Mercedes floating in Bengaluru, called the Silicon City of the country. And that is being repeated. This is the North Indian version. This is the Hindi remake of what went on in Bengaluru, so to speak. Sorry state of affairs, questions that remain unanswered. How is it possible that Gurugram, that hosts some of the most valuable companies in the country, Gurugram that hosts some of the most valuable working professionals and entrepreneurs in this country, how was it possible with some of the best brains in the entire country congregated in one area called Gurugram, despite all of it, despite all the tax money that comes in because of Gurugram, Gurugram remains the same. But the point here also is, Shweta, the only question that really pops in my mind is, has Gurugram ever seen these kind of rains, like the kind of rains that are happening right now? You've got to give it to the fact that the rains have been absolutely, has been an epitome of climate change. The timing of the rains and the quantity of the rains in Delhi NCR have, you ask anybody from Delhi NCR, they'll turn around and say, I've never seen rains like this in the month of July. So you've got to give that leeway to all the flooding that's happening in Gurugram. But the point is that it's not new that Gurugram's ability to resist floods have been, found wanting on occasions before this, because this did happen in September last year. The question only this time around is how much more time will it take for Gurugram to recover from all the flooding, keeping in mind the fact that the clouds are still hanging over the skies here in Delhi NCR. Looks like there is no respite from rains in the near future, at least, Shweta.
Right, no respite from rains. Last 72 hours have been worse than usual. Some would say better, but it's not really doing and doesn't really augur too well for infrastructure in Delhi NCR. Also the crops, and we've seen unseasonal, or rather rainfalls in this month, unheard of prior to this. Let's talk more on that. Lloyd Matthias joining us, who's an angel investor. Also joining us is Himanshu Singh Raghuvanshi. Gentlemen, appreciate you both taking time out. Lloyd, I want to come to you first. Is it a correct analogy to say that this is something that Gurgaon hasn't seen before, therefore it's unprepared?
Thanks, Shweta. I think the fact that the last 2 or 3 days have seen unprecedented rains is very obvious, right? We've been seeing the numbers that it's better than, higher than 20 years of history, recorded history. But having said that, I think what we're seeing right now in NCR and specifically Gurgaon, nothing but reflects civic apathy. The fact that we've not been able to work out an amicable or a good drainage system to ensure that. I just want to give a couple of statistics. The first, that the Gurgaon MP, Inderjeet Singh quoted himself a few months ago, that Gurgaon accounts for 65% of the income tax of the state of Haryana, right? It's one district out of 22 districts in Haryana, but accounts for 65%. 250 of the Fortune 500 companies have their offices or their India headquarters here. That's one half of the Fortune 500 companies. So I think Gurgaon in that sense represents the might of what new India is. The other that Krishna rightly made the comparison, which is Bangalore. The only difference I have is that Bangalore is an old city. It was built as a cantonment back in British times, and Bangalore has really grown over time. New Gurgaon is fundamentally about 20 to 25 years ago, right? So the state government had the opportunity to actually plan out infrastructure much better, right? A lot of the condos, a lot of the office complexes, the IT tech parks that we see in Gurgaon are all about 20 years old at the most. So I think this was a great opportunity missed. And what we are seeing right now is really a collapse of very basic civic infrastructure, just proper drainage systems, ensuring the water flows by, would have made things much better. Yes, the rains are unprecedented, but I'm sure we could have handled it much, much better.
Absolutely, and I must add, it doesn't really augur well for the image of Gurugram. Not just the fact that it hosts some of the major IT players, some of the most valued companies in the country, but also the fact that people in general don't deserve this. Himanshu, I want to understand from you, what sort of measures are companies taking to ensure that their employees are not harmed or affected by flooding? Because just as we looked in case of Bengaluru, there have been casualties. What are you as a founder, and what are other people in the founding community doing, in the management doing, to ensure the well-being of their employees?
No, thanks, Shweta. No, I think there is very little in our hands, right? People's lives are the most important as far as any business is concerned, right? So the measures that we've chosen to take is allowing employees to work from home. And people coming from far or even within Gurgaon faced a lot of issues even yesterday, right? So the only option that we have is asking employees to work from home. But if you look at the structure of Gurgaon, right, around more than 50% of the businesses in Gurgaon are not IT businesses, right? If you look at the tax contribution, more than 50% of the businesses are either in real estate, construction, steel manufacturing, automotive manufacturing, right? So a lot of work needs to happen in the office or in a manufacturing unit. So of course, employees' lives are the most important, and that is why the option of working from home is provided to them. But as a business community, I think business suffers. If you look at the overall business structure of Gurgaon, IT contributes to only 25% of the taxes, right? Remaining 75% of the businesses are physical businesses wherein people need to be in offices. And of course, when they're not in office, business suffers, right? So that is a huge dent, especially considering the fact that Gurgaon or Haryana, for that matter, is number 5 in terms of FDI received, right? So businesses trying to move to Gurgaon or trying to find a location would of course keep these things in consideration before even thinking of setting up a business in cities like these.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that businesses suffer. On one hand, Krishna, we're trying to roll out a red carpet. We talk about ease of doing business, and rightly so. But on the other hand, we're not able to build infrastructure that can stand up to as basic a natural condition like a rainfall.
Yeah, the only question here is that, I'm sure there is already rain-resistant infrastructure. The question is, are the kind of rains we're receiving and in a given span of time. Like, for example, when you have a situation like a flash flood kind of a situation, when you have like a torrential downpour in a short span of time, where you have infrastructure to drain out the water, but not the levels to which you would imagine. So the question here is, the infrastructure that is built needs to be built keeping in mind that we are on the cusp of climate change, and rains won't be the way we thought they were. So build it with capacities where it can, breach those limits that were, experienced before. So that is one thing. So and that applies to all big cities in this country, not just Gurugram or Bengaluru, even cities like Mumbai, which receive rain for 3 to 4 months a year. And clearly, I wonder if big cities uniformly should be able to have rain-resistant infrastructure which can resist rains of high levels, of high millimeters, these 100 mm rainfall, if they can resist that, then that will be great, because the levels of rainfall different cities in India gets changes. Mumbai, for example, gets 3 to 4 months of rain. Gurugram, that's exactly the point. Nobody would have seen this kind of rains in Gurugram or for Delhi NCRs, for the southwest monsoons. So, but all said and done, now that is happening, is one of the rudest wake-up calls that you can get for Gurugram. Already your rain infrastructure ain't that great, and looks like you're going to be getting more and more rains.
Absolutely.
And the same wake-up call that applies to Bengaluru as well. Why these two cities we even talk about is because both the cities are known for technology, innovation, solutions for the entire world sitting out of India. They need to start finding solutions and using technology for themselves, for their own survival as their companies.
I was in fact about to come to that. That's a very interesting point you made.
And one more point I want to add here is this. Exactly a week ago, Shweta, you had the Haryana state government announce the fact that restaurants and establishments can be open 24/7 in Gurugram. It was last Tuesday that we're talking about. And looks like even if they are open 24/7, people will not be able to get to any of these establishments. Isn't it the fact, Mr. Matthias?
That's an interesting point. But yeah, I think you're pointing to the right direction. I think it's really, at one level, the city is modernizing. You have 24/7 restaurants possible to be open. You've got state-of-the-art infrastructure in terms of malls. But the other, I think, basic civic infrastructure has hit rock bottom, right? Whether it is stormwater drains, the absence of them, whether it's electricity, right? No matter how much India talks about being 100% self-sufficient, I think a lot of areas of Gurgaon have to rely on generator backup power, right? That's a basic issue. I think public transport isn't great. Got a great metro, which is the Delhi metro coming all the way to Gurgaon, but the last mile connectivity is virtually absent, right? If you look at things like security. So I think until a city gets all its basic infra in place, I think ease of doing business is only going to become a notional concept, right? One aspect of ease of doing business is simplifying business in terms of processes and such like. The other is providing basics for employees and for offices. People just have to live a good life. And not being able to provide that, I think, is a complete shortcoming of our political and our bureaucratic establishment.
Is it just a political responsibility? And I think something very interesting Krishna also pointed out, that it becomes the responsibility of the stakeholders. And in this case, the stakeholders, not just the government, and maybe Himanshu can weigh in on that. Does it also then fall on the shoulders of the, these companies, that big companies, to also build infrastructure around places that they are operating from, Himanshu?
See, the point is, there are two stakeholders here, or three, in fact, right? The businesses, the people, and the authorities, right? Now, the businesses have chosen a place to operate out of. The basic responsibility that a business has is to conduct its business, pay the taxes, and abide by the laws and regulations of the country, right? Businesses are doing that. In terms of the taxes being generated, Gurgaon is Haryana and Haryana is Gurgaon, if I talk purely from a revenue point of view from the government, right? So the businesses are doing their part as far as the basic meeting the requirements is concerned, if I may use that word. The authorities also have to play that part. I mean, one point was, had Gurgaon received 50% of the rainfall than it actually did, would Gurgaon be in a similar situation? The answer would be yes, right? Why do airplanes have two engines? They can fly on a single engine, right? Because they carry a buffer, because it is a matter of life and death. It's not just a matter of what we are witnessing in Gurgaon. It's not just a matter of business, whether a business is being affected. It's also about life versus death, right? So authorities, I think businesses, of course, need to exceed the expectation in terms of not just playing their part by paying the taxes. Of course, they can club and do, but I think a larger share of responsibility lies with the authorities. Businesses and people deserve better than this.
Okay, fair point. Fair point that the entire onus does not really lie on businesses alone. But I think, Lloyd, and maybe you can come in here, it is important to hold those responsible for the condition of Gurugram in particular, and largely a large part of North India, responsible. I understand when there's a flash flood, and we understand when the roads close down in hilly areas. But we're talking about a modern metropolitan city. We're talking about a city that hosts businesses. We're talking about a city that gives a lot to the government in terms of revenue. Given all these parameters, who exactly is responsible here? We understand that you cannot, build infrastructure in a day, but alluding to what my colleague Krishna said, there is a need for flash flood or flood-resistant infrastructure, and that becomes a responsibility not just of the government, but all the other stakeholders as well.
Oh, absolutely, Shweta. I'll echo what my co-panelists said. I think, let's say, businesses have been living up to their end of the responsibility chart, and also gone a little further. For example, the rapid metro that operates in Gurgaon, which is run currently by the Delhi Metro, came out of a private-public partnership. The whole Golf Course Road, that brings traffic all the way from the airport right into the heart of Gurgaon, also was a public-private partnership. If you look at some of the tech parks or some of the corporate areas, a lot of them are very well serviced within premises. The fact is that public infrastructure has to be a responsibility of the civic and the state governments. And they have to foresee it, that given the fact that this district has seen so much of investment in the last 2 decades, that they have to up their act. And I think it's clearly a shortcoming or a failure of their inability to actually assess what could happen, right? Like my co-panelist rightly said, the situation in the monsoons is there are bound to be days when the rains are going to exceed the normal expectations. On those times, how does civic infra match up is what's important. And on that count, I think the state government and the local civic administration has failed the population completely. What's worse is that they have the opportunity to do it. Unlike cities that have evolved over time, Gurgaon, in a sense, New Gurgaon is really a new construction. It's really a 20-year-old city. Things can still be fixed. And not doing it despite having all the revenues and all the resources, I think speaks of a complete failure.
Okay. Krishna, would it be wrong to therefore say that the city has been built haphazardly? There's not much planning that has gone behind building the city. And more so, when we talk about floods, when we talk about rainfall, it becomes inevitable for us to be prepared for a natural calamity, given that we are living in an age where climate disaster, climate change, or climate crisis, as we rightly should be referring to, is the new normal. So therefore, be as prepared with our infrastructure as we are, let's say, with an earthquake.
Right. And also, I was just reminded of what a colleague told me, Shweta. In the Delhi NCR region, Noida and Gurugram have opposite ends of the issue spectrum. Noida, for that matter, has soil that's more, susceptible to earthquakes, and that is a risk that Noida runs. But it doesn't run risks of flooding as much. If you see this entire rain season, Noida has been relatively saved from the flooding. But whereas Delhi and Gurugram have been really badly affected. I was just seeing a meme. We're talking about memes. There's a new river in CP. It's called the Connaught River near the Connaught Place. That's the joke that they're making. There's a river flowing through Connaught Place is what they're saying right now.
I'm not sure. I would request, in fact, my producers to pull up some of those pictures or some of these memes at least.
from especially any visuals from Connaught Place would be good, because there's a river flowing over there, from what I understand. It's been newly named the Connaught River. But the fact of the matter is that Gurugram is also facing the kind of flooding that Delhi is facing. And the good thing is that Gurugram is not susceptible to earthquakes, because it is at the foothills of the Aravalli Hills, and so the soil is as old as the hills. So there's absolutely no issue when it comes to having the possibility of earthquake. But since it is at the foothills of the Aravalli Hills, it is susceptible to flooding. So I would say that forget about the weather, forget about the fact that you have incessant rainfall, unprecedented rainfall. Gurugram should have been prepared for flooding right from the beginning, because of its primary location at the foothills of a hill, where the water tends to stay back, and the water finds it difficult to drain outside. So Gurugram's planning has gone wrong from that, because somebody has forgotten the fact where it is located, and that it needs very strong stormwater drain systems, as good as the kind of stormwater drain systems that the coastal cities, and maritime cities have, although Gurugram is not one. So I think that's where there's been a problem, and consistently, I'm sure upgrades have been made to the stormwater drain system, but clearly it's falling woefully short of the requirements.
Absolutely, woefully short of the requirements, as basic requirements as being prepared for a calamity that it is prone to. Forget about a calamity that may not happen, and so there may not be an earthquake, but we know that it is on the foothills of Aravallis and the foothills of Himalaya, so there is a likelihood of flooding. At least be prepared for a natural calamity that is bound to occur. Before I let you both go, Himanshu, I want to understand from you, what sort of losses in business are we looking at? We understand that restaurants are not operational. We know that schools have been closed down. We know that employees have been asked to go back to home and start working from home, at least at this moment, not indefinitely, but for a couple of days from now. But are we looking at an immediate hit to the business activity?
Of course, absolutely. Right. If I talk about Gurgaon, one of the facts that I stated was around 30% of the tax revenues that Gurgaon witnesses comes from either steel manufacturing or automotive manufacturing. Right. The startup that we manage is in the automotive space. It's as well. One thing is managing your business internally, but if it is a tiered business like the automotive sector or steel manufacturing, where there is a tier 3 manufacturer or a tier 2 manufacturer, then a tier 1, then is a OEM, right? So if there are so many layers to a business, and business is bound to suffer, because if one chain breaks, the entire value chain completely breaks down, right? So there are going to be huge losses. Last year, I think the rain that Bangalore witnessed, in a single day, Bangalore witnessed a loss of close to 225 crores, I think, on the number that was quoted by one of the authorities, right? So Gurgaon is bound to see losses of such nature, because the physical businesses demand people or talent to be present in the office or a manufacturing unit. You cannot do without it. So there are bound to be losses that the nation is going to witness. Even in the IT space, I mean, I'm talking about the non-IT space as of now, but even in the IT space, I mean, it's going to run into hundreds of crores.
Okay, so bound to be losses as a result of the incessant rain and the resultant flooding in parts of Gurugram, largely Gurugram, not Noida as much. But I want to go to Lloyd, and for your final comments, Lloyd, I understand you live around Gurugram, so you have a better understanding of the kind of rainfall it has been seeing year on year. So this is not new, is my understanding. This has been happening for a while. About time for the government to perhaps wake up and smell the coffee.
Absolutely, Shweta. I think, like I said, the extent of concentration of rain over the last 2 days has been unusual. But to be fair, flooding in Gurgaon is not new. It's been happening over the last 5 or 6 years. I live and work in Gurgaon, fortunately or unfortunately. And I think, like Himanshu said, I think one aspect is business losses, right? Clearly, there is a certain downside. But I think more than that, I think is the reputation loss that a city that brands itself as the Millennium City is going to face, right? If you saw 2 years back when Delhi had that big pollution issue, a lot of companies thought twice about whether to relocate their offices outside of Delhi into other places.
Yeah.
I know of an automobile or a tire major that moved out of Delhi, Haryana, to Pune. So I think clearly this kind of collapse of civic infrastructure through floods or patchy electricity has a larger implication. It impacts the reputation of the city, it impacts what businesses feel, it impacts what people feel. Right? Today, in a world where people can work out of anywhere, do they continue to have to live in a place where every now and then they will be disrupted, right? Either by pollution or by lack of electricity or by flooding. So I think these are issues that need to be looked at. And like I said, the opportunity to course correct is still available. This is still relatively a new city. A lot of the infrastructure can be developed if the state government and the civic bodies have the will to do it. I think the time to do it is now. Otherwise, we're really losing out on a great opportunity, and seeing what was once called a Millennium City. And that will be very, very unfortunate.
Right. Civic apathy at its best. Krishna, time is now. That I think I agree with that 100%. Since this has been a recurring activity, and I think Lloyd's pointed out something very interesting. He said there are companies that are looking to move out of Haryana, move out of Gurugram, and that would be a loss to the state, right?
Yeah,
and not just temporary loss, that would be a permanent loss.
Yeah, when they say move out, they're saying that these are companies that have come to Gurugram, choosing it as a great place to want to do business, but they're now being literally driven out by the kind of obstacles that they face to even do that business that they came to Gurugram to do in the first place. And every single city that boasts of itself as a startup hub or an investment hub always has to bear in mind that there is competition is only growing. In this country, you have newer and newer urban centers that are able to attract people, attract companies. Look at a city like Hyderabad. If you talk about there's a problem in Bengaluru, in down south you have Hyderabad coming up, and you've seen the way Chennai improving in terms of attracting foreign direct investment in the recent past, Tamil Nadu as a state per se. So you have other places to do business that give the advantages that a Gurugram or a Bengaluru has. So I would say the problem remains the same for a Gurugram or a Bengaluru, because there's competition for them within the country, and of course outside of the country. Why stay in Gurugram if you're going to end up spending the same amount of money as you would in Singapore? So
better
then you would
weather.
want to and you want to go to Singapore, where public infrastructure is absolutely fantastic.
Right.
So Indian cities looking to be global cities, you can name them in a fancy way. Silicon City, Millennium City. You can go on with fancy names. There's a gift city also now. The names are not going to matter. What's on the ground is going to matter, Shweta.
Absolutely. Names wouldn't matter. They wouldn't stand alone for a very long time. As far as infrastructure is concerned, public civic infrastructure, it is crucial. It is important to business sentiment. It's also important to the overall image of the city. In this case, Gurugram being a working class capital for people who are operating out of Delhi NCR. All of them going to Gurugram to work, going to Gurgaon to party, to be at a restaurant. All of that takes a screeching halt if the public infrastructure is not able to stand up to unseasonal rainfall. We will of course keep tracking all those details for you on News 9. Himanshu, Lloyd, thanks very much for joining with your inputs on that very important story.
Thanks, Shweta.